Hi, my name is Stuart Lynch, and in this video I'm going to be updating an existing app to iOS 15 to take advantage of some of the new APIs. This is the first of a 4-part video series, and I'm going to be updating an app that I created in a previous series, and I'll get to that shortly. In this first video, I'll be exploring some new convenience iOS 15 APIs, as well as the new FocusState, keyboard toolbar, and the new alert instance. In subsequent videos, we'll be looking at throwing functions, swipe actions on a list row, lists that are bound to an observable object, and finally adding a search feature to our list. Now before I get started, let me request that if you enjoy the video, please leave a comment below and give it a thumbs up and subscribe to my channel. Make sure that you ring the bell to be notified of new videos. And if you want to support my work, you can buy me a coffee. If this is something you want to learn, then keep watching. As I'm creating this video, I'm in the early stages of the beta cycle, and as you can see, I'm using beta 4 of Xcode 13. As a starter project, I'm going to be using this To Do app that I wrote as part of an early series titled Not Another SwiftUI To Do app. In that series, I go on and convert the app to use Combine. I won't be using Combine in this video, so I'm going to start basically with the completed project as of video 3 in that series. If you want to see how the app was built, I recommend that you watch those first 3 videos. Now the only difference is that I've changed the navigation bar to use a navigation bar title and navigation bar items rather than a toolbar. So if you're starting from your own code, make sure that you make these changes. Otherwise, you can download the starter project from the link in the description below. I've also added a custom icon and a launch screen image that I created using Jordi Bruin's fabulous bakery app. I'll leave a link as well for that in the notes below. Other than that, nothing else has changed. Now before I take you through a walkthrough of the app, let me first change my project's deployment target to iOS 15. And I also have to make sure that the target is set for that as well. So let's start by working through a demo to create some to-dos, and I'm going to run this on an iPhone 12 Pro simulator. When the app launches, you get this disturbing printout in the console displaying all of these constraint warnings. For some reason, this is a result of the navigation bar item. In my video series, I used a toolbar item instead, and that didn't suffer from these warnings. After this demo, I'll show you how you can disable this warning. First though, let's create a to-do by tapping on the Add button. This brings up a modal sheet where I can enter some text. And let me first create one and preface it with task. And the task will be do dishes. Let me follow that with another one. And this time I'll preface it with groceries. And I'll specify apples. Now you'll have noted that when I added a to-do, there was another switch item there that was called completed. And I can tap on one of those to-dos now and flick the switch to update the to-do. The display in the list changes to show the text in green with a strike through. Let's create one more task, and I'll call it mistake. With that being a mistake, I want to delete it. So I can swipe from the trailing edge and delete the to-do. That's it. Now, what about those warnings? They get in the way of some other things that I'm trying to put onto the console for debugging purposes. So to disable that, I can go to my app starting point, and where the content view appears, we can set a property of false to a special user defaults key. So on the content view, set up on appear, and then for the action, set user defaults dot standard dot set value of false, and the key is underscore UI constraint based layout log unsatisfiable. If I run this now, nothing seems to have changed. But that's because the view appears before we've set our user defaults. Let me run it once more. That's better. We get this directory printed out first, and then a single warning telling us that we've disabled the constraint warnings. So what is this directory? Well, in the app, when we create, update, or delete a to-do item, it is saved to the Documents directory using the functions that I've created in the FileManager extension. In our view model, which I call Data Store, when I initialize an instance of this content view, I print out the path. And that's what this is. So if I go to the Finder now and choose Go to Folder from the Go menu, I can paste in that URL and go there. Here you see that their file is called todos.json, and I can open that in the text editor. And you'll see that it's just a JSON object, and I use the quotable protocol to decode that into our model. If I invalidate this data, for example, change the first key name to names, and run once more, I get an alert displayed on my screen telling me how to resolve the warning. Well, let me stop now and go back and change that JSON now so that we don't get this warning anymore. Okay, that's a walkthrough and a minor change to the completed project from episode 3 of the To Do app series. From now on, we're going to be introducing some new features of iOS 15. So let's get started. My UI for now is not going to change, so I'm going to dismiss the preview canvas and make sure we test in the simulator. First, let's take a look at some simple things. Now in iOS 15, instead of using the full insert group list style struct to modify the list style, we can now use the enum.insetGroup instead. And you'll notice that when we start with that period and start typing, we actually can pick from any one of the different styles like sidebar, plain, etc. You'll find that this new enum-based modifier for other things like button styles as well. Another thing I want to do is modify how I load data from our file. In this example where I'm using a view model called Data Store, I load the data when the state object is initialized. I want to move this action here over to the view itself as a task that occurs when the view is initialized instead. So I'm going to cut this if statement that checks to see if the document exists and then calls the load to-dos function out of this initializer. And I'm going to move it over to the content view, and I'll create a new method called task that can be applied to the view. And I'll paste that in there. Now, of course, because we've moved it out of the data store, we have to specify that the instance of the data store view model is accessed so that we can access the load to-dos function. In other tutorials, you may have seen this kind of action taking place in the onAppear modifier. Well, this new task method will replace that, and it has the advantage of allowing us a closure that is asynchronous. And I'll be returning to this later in the video series. If I run this now, it all loads as before, and the UI hasn't changed. Another thing I can do is update the form where I add a new to-do. There's a new environment variable called dismiss that now replaces the need to use the convoluted presentation mode. So let me just change this to dismiss and change the variable itself to dismiss as well. And then everywhere in our code use that previous presentation mode .wrapValue.dismiss. We can simply just call the function dismiss. Now the function name gets its name from the variable name. The key value will always be dismiss, but if we change the variable, our function will also change. Now currently when I tap on the Add button, a modal sheet appears and you have to tap into the To Do field to start typing. What I'd like to do is to make that field the first responder, in that when I open this screen, I'll automatically have the cursor entered into that field and the keyboard presented for typing. In the To Do form view, I can add a new property with the @FocusState property wrapper that will allow me to specify which field on my form will be in focus. Now, I only have to do one field, so I could just use a Boolean property for that. But I want this to be extendable in case I'm going to add more fields to my form. So I'm going to create an enum called field, and I'll have a single case for the field, which I will call case of to do. Next, I'm going to create a new optional property called focused field that will be of type field, and I'll decorate it with the property wrapper FocusState. Now, since this is optional, we are not assigning a particular focus, which means nothing's going to happen initially. So no field will be set to be in focus. If we want to specify a field focus, then we add a modifier to all of the fields of our form which we want to apply the focus to. So attached to our text view, we're going to apply focused bound to our focus field. And this is our to do field, so we'll make it equals to the enum to do. Now when this form loads, we can apply a task method. And so within that task method, we can simply say focus field equals to do, so that when it loads, it'll make that field the focus field. Makes sense, doesn't it? Well, this should always work, I would think, but it doesn't. When I launch the app, nothing happens. I looked this up on Stack Overflow and discovered that people were successful if they added a half-a-second delay using a dispatch queue.main.async. So let me try that. Still no change. Now, this is frustrating. So, I couldn't quite understand what was going on. Well, it turns out there is a second bug. And if this is working for you, then great, it's fixed. However, I discovered that the problem here is that I have my VStack embedded within a form. I can't even remember why I did that. But I'm going to remove the form altogether and add a spacer in the VStack and then add some padding around it. This time when I test, it works. If I did remove that delay, I'd find that it didn't work. So the delay is definitely going to have to be there. Now, related to this focus state is the ability to add buttons to a keyboard toolbar. And when we do that, we have the ability to use a button to set the focus state to nil. And that will remove the focus from any field that is currently in focus and dismiss the keyboard. There'll be no need to invoke a UI application shared method as I've done in the past. So what we can do now is add a toolbar to the keyboard using the new toolbar item group. So first we'll add a toolbar, and then we'll add a new toolbar item group with a placement of keyboard. For the content, we can add a button, and in that button, we can set the action so that the focus field is set to nil. And for the label, I'll use an image that's a system image that is named keyboard.chevron.compactDown. Now when we try to add a new item or edit an existing item, the keyboard pops up. And we can dismiss it if we choose. Now I don't like how this is in the center of the toolbar though. So back in our form view, I can create an H stack where the first view is a spacer followed by the button. If I test this now, it's looking much better. So let's add another task. Now, one more thing in this video. The alert struct has now been depreciated. And I'm not sure how I feel about this because I've really enjoyed using the alert bound to an identifiable item. And this will no longer be available to us in its previous form. There is a new version of the alert method that does not require us to use the alert struct. Now, I've created a complete video on the new alerts, and I'll leave a link in the notes below if you want more information on this. So this new version of alert requires us to create a Boolean property as well as our optional property, so that I can use isPresented, which will be bound to that property. So let me go to our ViewModels data source and add that new property that I'll call showErrorAlert. It'll be published, and I'll set it to false. And now everywhere that we set our app error, we'll also have to set showAlertError to true. And this occurs in 4 different locations. So now we're setting 2 different things. We're signaling that we want to show an alert, and at the same time we're providing more information by setting the values of our optional error type. Now, error type doesn't have to be identifiable, and we can have as many properties that we want here, including some computed properties. So, for example, let's remove identifiable. And I can remove the ID property, but we'll keep the same error property. Now we can create 2 more properties. One that we can use for the message for our alert, and that can be a computed one. And what we'll return is the errors.localizeDescription. Now the second property is going to be a button. And I'll simply do nothing but cancel. But first though, we'll need to change the import to SwiftUI. Now I can create that button with the OK label and an action that is empty. However, to make sure that we only get a single button in the alert, we need to specify that the role is cancel. So back in our content view, then we can use this new initializer for the alert method that is way down in the bottom of the options. And that allows us to present alert with data. For the title, I'll use file error. And our isPresented is going to be bound to the data store's show alert. The presenting data is going to be our data store app error. Then if we hit enter on the closure, then we get to choose a variable for the argument, and that's going to be an instance of our data source app error, in which case we can then specify the button property as the action for this. Now if we want to use the message field to present a message below the title, then we have to add another trailing closure that's called message. And it also gets the app error. And we can use this then to present a text view using the appErrors.message property, that localized description. So let's test. When we run our app, currently no errors are generated. But remember, we can force one. So in our console then, we're provided with that path to where the saved file is stored. So I'll copy it once more and choose Go to Finder from the Go menu, paste in that path. Let me open that file once more and invalidate the JSON by changing one of the keys. And now when I run the app, There is a decoding error, and that's displayed as our alert. So it's all working as we had designed it. Let's just make sure we change that key back to the right one now before we move on. Now there's one more significant topic that we're going to cover before we add more iOS 15 functionality. And in the next video, I'm going to be moving away from using completion handlers in my FileManager functions to using functions that throw errors.